This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver. It's fewer than 90 days out from the presidential election, with another primary waiting in the wings tomorrow. J.R. Ross fills us in. He's editor of WizPolitics.com. Welcome, J.R. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we've got a partisan primary tomorrow. It's expected to be relatively low turnout compared to November, but there's two constitutional amendments on the ballot about how Wisconsin's governor is able to allocate funds. They were added there by Republican lawmakers who didn't like how Democratic Governor Tony Evers spent federal COVID relief money. What can you tell us about that?
Well, from the big perspective, we're seeing a lot of money being spent by the groups opposed to the amendments. I went through finance reports last week. I found about $3.5 million raised by the three main groups so far. Now, the one group that's registered for the amendments had raised like $15,000. Doesn't count, though, like issue ads. Those are different organization efforts. We've seen something from two conservative groups that are doing a six-figure buy, trying to push the amendment. Even with that, we're seeing a lot of money being spent opposed to the amendment. And there's a good reason why. I mean, one, Democrats are opposed to it because they think it's an infringement upon Governor Evers' powers, or Republicans trying to take away Evers' powers. But two, we're seeing Republicans more frequently go to referendum to try and pass things because Evers vetoes them. And I'm picking up this kind of thought from some Democrats that, hey, if they can knock down this effort on the referendum, maybe it'll discourage Republicans from going to referendum so often, trying to amend the Constitution over what are basically legislative disputes. So that's part of what's driving some of this. Now, looking at those amendments of language, it'll be interesting to see how voters perceive them. There are two questions. One's a little more easier to read than the other, basically, but they're both basically about should lawmakers have say in how federal money is spent. It's been interesting. The ads against those amendments have really pushed the idea that these are trying to take away a check and balance. And Republicans are trying very hard to counter that. They're just being drowned out a bit by the paid campaign by the Democratic groups.
Where's the forethought in these types of constitutional amendments? I mean, it's possible that one day there will be a Republican governor and a democratically led legislature.
Oh, yeah, and Republicans make the argument that, look, we learned our lesson. We gave away this power back in, I think, 1930s. It's time for a change. And after going through the COVID-19 experience where Governor Evers had basically sole authority to spend more than $5 billion, they don't want that to happen again. The counter has been that, look, in emergency situations, if you have more reviews, you slow down things. And don't forget, if you go back to the COVID-19 pandemic funds and what happened with that process, Evers and Republicans did not agree at all on how to spend that money, at least not after the initial surge. There was some kind of unanimity there in mid-2020 about how to do this, but after the next big batch of funds came under the Biden administration, it became a legislative slugfest. Republicans wanted to pass tax cuts and do all kinds of that money, and Evers said no, and he vetoed the bills they sent him. So, it's just basically been they couldn't agree on anything, which is basically how they've operated for the last 5 years.
And do you know how this COVID relief money affected the average voter? Like, how would somebody know, this is what I want the governor to be able to do with this kind of money, and this is what he did, versus what Republican lawmakers are saying we don't want the money used for?
Oh, it's a good question, but it's a hypothetical one. You can't really, people aren't going to feel what they didn't experience, right? So you can say that, hey, Republicans wanted to pass tax cuts with that money, but they didn't feel that tax cuts. I'm not sure I can really quantify that for you.
Well, what did Governor Evers spend the federal COVID relief money on?
Oh, I mean, he spent it, there's medical emergencies, there were aid to various entities. He put money toward child care costs, but he's also put money toward things like funding sports facilities, helping with local developments, things like that Republicans said is not what this is intended for, and that he's abusing the power, essentially. There's a breakdown the governor's office provides to the Department of Treasury every year, I think it is, on where it's gone. And, most has gone toward helping small businesses bounce back from the COVID-19 pandemic, things like that. But there's definitely been some things that Republicans have said, hey, that's an appropriate expense for that money.
So people in various districts in this partisan primary tomorrow will either vote in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary. Is there anything on the ballot you're watching for around the state?
Well, it's going to be interesting, like who's going to turn out, right? Because we only have the amendments on the ballot as a statewide question. Going back 2 years ago in 2022, we had a Republican primary for governor that helped boost turnout to about 27%. You kind of look through the years. In 2020, it was 21%. 2018, 23, had a primary for governor that year on the Democratic side. But in 16 and 14, we had turnout in the 14.5% range. So we're not expecting a ton of people to turn out. There are some pockets of things, though, that are going to be interesting. Up in Green Bay, 8th Congressional District, there's a three-way GOP primary to succeed Mike Gallagher, who resigned from that seat. Tony Weed is a businessman who's been endorsed by Donald Trump. He's playing that up in his campaign ads. Roger Roth is a former state senator, ran for lieutenant governor in 2022. He's raised more money from others than Andre Jacques, who is a current state senator from De Pere, running as well. But, Trump has been knocking Roger Roth as kind of like a rhino, quote unquote, which is interesting because Roger's a pretty loyal Republican while he's in the legislature. But still, that's part of the knock on him. And then Andre Jacques has been kind of trailing financially, but he kind of put this ad together of him in a boxing robe, throwing shadow punches and, being the big guy with the big right hook for conservatives kind of thing. It's kind of a kitschy ad, but might break through for some of these underfunded. So that's going to be interesting to watch. Over in western Wisconsin, the 3rd Congressional District, we have a three-way Democratic primary to take on Derek Van Orden, a freshman Republican congressman from Prairie du Chien. That one's kind of come down to a slugfest between Rebecca Cook, who's a nonprofit director from Eau Claire, and Katrina Shanklin, state lawmaker from Stevens Point. It's really been interesting to watch where that one goes. Cook has had more resources, raised more money. Shanklin's had a little more union support. But you look at the 3rd Congressional District, it kind of runs from along the Mississippi River and then east, not quite into Madison, Dane County area. And then it has this kind of island that kind of goes up his arm that grabs Stevens Point. So Shanklin's from a different part of the district than where most of the people live. She's got to break through in places like Eau Claire and La Crosse, which is where the population centers are, to give her a better shot in that district.
You're tuned in to Capital Notes. I'm WEWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. Okay, J.R., thanks for that. Let's talk about developments in the presidential race in Wisconsin. So the Marquette poll shows the race between Harris and Trump as on a knife's edge, as pollster Charles Franklin put it, about 50-50 in the state and within the margin of error. But Democratic enthusiasm is way up from before. What are you watching from now on?
Well, one, is this a sugar high? So let's pull back and remember that this race has changed dramatically in the last 3 weeks, right? Went from Joe Biden being the nominee, refusing to step aside, to all of a sudden on July 21st, he announced he's not going to run anymore. Kamala Harris steps in, visits Wisconsin a couple of days later. She becomes basically the presumptive nominee within days of that. Democrats embrace her. We were talking about an assassination attempt of Donald Trump like 3 or 4 weeks ago. That seems like an eon, a lifetime ago, right? Like things have changed so much in that race. So is this really, truly Kamala Harris just getting a boost because she's not Joe Biden? Or is this how am I going to say this? When I've talked to Democrats, they have said that when Biden was still in the race, it felt like kind of a death march. Like they felt like they were going to lose this race and they couldn't do anything about it. They're trying to minimize the damage down ballot. Now that Harris is the nominee, there's this Democratic enthusiasm like, oh, this feels great. We have all this excitement and energy going on, and it's gotten them to being tied. That's something to remember. Like as much as things have gone well for Kamala Harris lately, she's basically tied with Trump. The big thing is the enthusiasm has increased for Democrats. It gives them a shot. It doesn't mean they're going to win all of a sudden or that they have an easy path to victory in November, Wisconsin. It's still going to be a 50-50 state. That's what we are. But Democrats feel so much better because they feel like they have energy again, whereas with Biden, they felt like they'd kind of been sapped at energy because they felt like he wasn't going to win.
I looked up the Marquette poll from August of 2020, and it was showing Biden having a lead over Trump. And of course, that race ended up being extremely close by just around 20,000 votes. Now the polls are showing it even closer. What would be the ways that people can pull ahead?
Well, what's going to happen in the next 90 days with the economy, right? We had a rough day in the market last week, all kinds of attention for that for Republicans. Then the market kind of picked back up a couple of days later. Now it has recovered everything it lost, right? But there's one thing. We're going to see the Fed's to probably do an interest rate cut in September. I say probably because I'm not an economist nor a guy who does predictions very often, but the going thought is there'll probably be an interest rate cut. That could goose the economy. But if the things go south, we had a recession, that's not great for Democrats. They're in the White House right now. There's that issue. There's, the examination of Tim Walz and J.D. Vance as running mates. How's that going? Are they going to have any problems? Are they going to hinder the campaigns? It's just so many factors between now and November. I mean, again, we're talking about assassination attempt a month ago, and Republicans were like, okay, this race is over. Donald Trump survived that. Joe Biden is a really weak incumbent. We're going to win. Now, everything's kind of back to 50-50. It's like I said, I always tell people 3 months is an eternity in politics. So we've got a ways to go. There are lots of twists and turns. Who has the momentum? Who has the energy? Who has the infrastructure? And how the finances go. There are all kinds of factors like that, but that they can kind of work on. The things they can't control are like what happens with the economy. Is there going to be any kind of global conflict? Those things that could really turn this race on a dime very quickly.
And of course, we've talked in the past about how the Democratic Party in Wisconsin has been outraising the Republican Party, and about how Biden, now Harris's campaign, had built out a lot more infrastructure in the state in the form of field offices and staff than the Trump campaign. Where are we at? Any idea now in terms of fundraising and infrastructure?
So we saw a big boost for Kamala Harris after she became the nominee. They outraised Trump in the last month, so they're very happy about that. Looking at Wisconsin, we have seen Democrats build 2 to 3 times more offices in the state than Republicans. But I also remind people that back in 2016, Trump won Wisconsin without much of an infrastructure. There was a lot of talk back then about how he really hadn't focused on that. So I don't know if that's the end-all, be-all, because Trump supporters are pretty diehard people when it comes to voting. I looked at the Marquette poll. We saw Democrats, 81% now are enthusiastic to vote in November. It's 86% for Republicans. So Democrats had a huge boost, like 17 points, something like that. But Republicans still had an advantage. So there are lots of things out there that I'm kind of watching with this race, but the infrastructure piece is definitely in favor of Democrats. But does Donald Trump need that after what he's done before?
Okay, thanks for that breakdown, JR. Shifting gears a tiny bit, inquiring minds want to know, we've got the Olympics in Paris, France right now. Are you catching any of the events? And if so, what's your favorite?
I don't watch a lot of TV. I'm too busy to go through finance reports.
Gotcha. So no track, no swimming.
I catch 30 seconds every once in a while on social media what happened in an event. I did watch one swim race. I was walking the treadmill at the gym the other day, so I guess I got that going for me. But not a whole lot of Olympic watching. My family are big fans. Me, not so much.
All politics all the time for JR.
Pretty much.
Well, thanks for joining me on Capital Notes.
Hey, anytime. Take care.
That was J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on lake effect, and check out the Capital Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.